Once again, welcome. This is Kevin Midke from the Siuslaw Public Library with part 2 of our online Best Books program. In the first video, I described how this series would work, and I encourage you to go back and view and listen to video number 1 if you haven't heard it yet. In that video, I discussed breaking the Best Books presentation into 5 parts, 3 of fiction and 2 of nonfiction. This is part 2 of fiction. Again, the list of books discussed can be found on the library's website, www.siuslawlibrary.info, with titles marked as to whether they are available through Overdrive, Library to Go, as ebooks or e-audio. Most are, but some primarily nonfiction are not. So, in the last video, we discussed the first 12 books, and I'll pick up where I left off. So the first title for today is Black Leopard, Red Wolf by Marlon James. Marlon James is originally from Jamaica. He now lives in the United States. He is one of many authors nowadays coming from different backgrounds, whether it's African or Asian or South American, that's writing fantasy and science fiction. Some really interesting things are coming out of areas where previously we really hadn't had a lot of science fiction or fantasy. This is the first installment in the Dark Star trilogy and has been touted as an African Game of Thrones. And indeed, James, author of the 2015 Man Booker Prize winner, A Brief History of 7 Killings, throws pretty much every fantasy and horror creature known into this brilliantly chaotic mashup of genres and styles. Readers will discover mermaids, vampires, zombies, and witches, along with edge-of-your-seat chills and cheeky humor. Yet, for all the fantasy and action, James never loses sight of the human story as his hero, Tracker, searches for the truth about a mysterious boy. Tracker's quest across wild lands and through cities brings him tantalizingly closer to the elegant, shape-shifting leopard. Our next book is The Family Upstairs by Lisa Jewell. I have not been able to finish this book because every time I check it out, it turns out there's a whole bunch of holds, and I'm always having to return it before I get through it. This is a suspense thriller book. Libby receives a surprise inheritance on her 25th birthday. She's been left a mansion in London's Chelsea neighborhood, the house where she was abandoned as a baby. It was a huge scandal at the time, as she was clean and cared for, but her parents were long dead in the kitchen, having entered into a suicide pact. All of this has been hidden from Libby until now, and she's determined to find out the truth behind her family's history. Meanwhile, in France, Lucy travels from hostel to hostel with her 2 children in tow, barely getting by as a street musician, when she gets a mysterious text that drives her to extremes in order to get back to London. Her connection to the Chelsea house, and therefore Libby, is the heart of Jewell's latest thriller. Booklist says, this is another dark winner from Jewell, who expertly teases out her tricky tale with stunning moments and richly drawn characters. Ask Again Yes is by Beth Keane, a profoundly moving novel about 2 neighboring families in a suburban town, the friendship between their children, the tragedy that reverberates over 4 decades, and the power of forgiveness. Kirkus calls this graceful and mature, a solidly satisfying read. Well, here's one of the authors that most of you probably know. This newest book by Stephen King is called The Institute. This won the Goodreads Choice Award for horror this year. In a quiet Minnesota neighborhood, intruders kidnap 12-year-old prodigy Luke Ellis and murder his parents. When Luke wakes up, he finds himself in a room identical to his own bedroom, except that he is now a resident of The Institute, a facility that tests telekinetic and telepathic abilities of children. Luke finds comfort in the company of the children in the front half. Others have graduated to the back half, where kids check in, but they don't check out. The front half are promised that they'll be returned to their parents after testing and a visit to back half. But Luke becomes suspicious and desperate to get out and get help for the others. However, no child has ever escaped the Institute. Publishers Weekly says, not a word is wasted in this meticulously crafted novel, which once again proves why King is the king of horror. Another book that came out this year that's kind of similar in theme that you might be interested in, if you like the Institute, is Inspection by Josh Malerman. Malerman also wrote Bird Box several years ago, which was turned into a film. It's kind of a post-apocalyptic thriller you might have read or seen the movie of. Anyway, The Institute by Stephen Keane. The next book, This Tender Land by William Kent Kruger. You may have read some of Kruger's Cork O'Connor mysteries, which are set in northern Minnesota. This book is a standalone novel. Minnesota, 1932. 12-year-old orphan Odie and his 16-year-old brother are the only white students at the Lincoln Indian Training School. When Odie accidentally kills a fiendish school employee, he, his brother, their Sioux friend Mose, and a bereft little girl Emmy, whose single-parent mother has been killed by a tornado, must flee by canoe down the nearby Gilead River. And so their adventure begins, narrated by Odie, who is a born storyteller who often entertains his companions with tales. Booklist says this is a richly imagined and exceptionally well plotted and written. The novel is most of all a compelling, often haunting story that will captivate both adult and young adult readers. Next up is Lost Children Archive by Valeria Luiselli. An unnamed husband and wife drive with their children in the back seat from New York City to Arizona. He seeking to record remnants of Geronimo and the Chiricahua Apache, she hoping to locate two Mexican girls last seen awaiting deportation at a detention center. The husband recounts for the 10-year-old son and 5-year-old daughter stories about a legendary band of Apache children. The wife explains how immigrant children become separated from parents, losing their way and sometimes their lives. This is a powerful border story, at once intellectual and heartfelt. Another read-alike title, kind of along the idea of immigrants to the United States, is a book that we'll be talking about in the third video, which is called On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous. Next up, this book won the Goodreads Choice Awards for both romance and debut novel. And one of my coworkers wrote about this. An adorable, heartfelt, hilarious, wrenching, and ultimately so satisfying. McQuiston imagines what would happen if the U.S. President's son and a royal prince of England fall in love. Henry and Alex are so great together, and the drama of their unexpected relationship is only heightened by international relations and a fraught presidential election. This book really reflects today's changing world of romance publishing, where all kinds of genres are showing up. The Silent Patient won the Goodreads Choice Awards for mystery and thriller. A therapist becomes dangerously obsessed with uncovering the truth about what prompted his client, an artist who refuses to speak, to violently murder her husband in a way that triggers mass public speculation. If you like Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn, or if you've read books by Ruth Ware or Jennifer McMahon, I think you would like The Silent Patient. This was a really intense thriller. It was a very satisfying read and had a very surprising ending. The Widows by Jess Montgomery. This has kind of quietly become very popular. It's one of those books that I hadn't really heard of, and then I noticed we had a whole lot of holds on it, and a lot of people were requesting this book. The Appalachian region of Ohio. Two women from different backgrounds are brought together by the murder of the local sheriff, the man they both love. One is a coal miner, union organizer, and moonshiner. One is the sheriff's wife, now the acting sheriff. Both love lost ones in a coal mine collapse. This is the story of strong women, tough men, unlikely relationships, and the stunning discovery of who murdered the sheriff. This book came out in 2019. The sequel, called The Hollows, came out just this year. So if you like The Widows and you haven't read it yet, look out for The Hollows, because that one is out there. The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern is the third in the literary fantasy novels that I'm talking about in this program. I mentioned two yesterday, The Third House and The 10,000 Doors of January. The Starless Sea is number 3. This is by Erin Morgenstern, who was the author of The Night Circus, which I think is personally one of my favorite books of the last 10 years. I thought The Night Circus was absolutely fabulous. The Starless Sea is very literary. I was about 50 pages in it, and I really wasn't sure where it was going. And my coworker who had read it before me said, you have to trust that the author will take you where it needs to go and will tie everything up. And it did. And the coworker actually wrote out for me this description. Another astonishing, devastating book from Erin Morgenstern. It's no surprise that it took her so long to publish another novel after The Night Circus. The Byzantine twists and turns in this story of stories are incredibly complex, but also somehow, mostly, easy to follow as a reader as long as you're patient and trust that she knows where she's taking you. I can't really say much about the plot, both to avoid spoilers and because it's hard to describe. Part fairy tale, part fantasy, part literary fiction, it defies category and should appeal to a wide group of readers. Next is The Whisper Man by Alex North. This is North's debut novel. If you like British suspense thrillers, I think you'll enjoy this book. Tom and his son Jake moved to Featherbank to rebuild their life after the death of Tom's wife. Unknown to them, the town has a dark history, with a serial killer nicknamed the Whisper Man. Meanwhile, another little boy has gone missing, and Jake begins to hear whispers in his new house. Booklist says, at its heart, this brilliant novel is an affirmation of the power of the father-son relationship, but it also charts a descent into darkness. The final book I'm going to talk about today was another favorite of mine this year, and I don't read much romance, but I really liked The Flatshare by Beth. My coworker wrote, charming and emotionally satisfying. When Tiffy's boyfriend breaks up with her yet again, she needs somewhere cheap to live. An unusual ad for a roommate catches her eye, and soon she's living in Leon's apartment and sleeping in his bed. But it's not what you think. Tiffy and Leon have never even met. He works as a night nurse. She works during the day. So they share the flat in shifts, agreeing to remain strangers. But then the note writing starts, and making food for each other. Soon they're becoming friends via Post-it, and getting involved in each other's lives. Could they be friends in real life too? My coworker goes on, I love this book. It wasn't quite what I expected, but in the best ways. The narrative is told in alternating first person, and the author does a good job of writing their voices differently. Their friends and family are lovely too. And, you know, I can very much see this book being turned into the next great British comedy romance film. It was that good, and it was that funny. Okay, well, that's it for this video. Next up will be part 3 of fiction. So in the meantime, stay safe, everybody, and I'll be talking to you again.